Hello there everyone, I hope you are all doing well inshallah. In this video lecture I'll be trying to explain Moby Dick, Herman Melville's greatest achievement from 1851. In this lecture I'll be trying to explore themes, characters, and most importantly the Romantic movement and Transcendentalism, especially in relation to Ishmael and dark romanticism from the perspective of Captain Ahab. On an equal footing, I'll be trying to connect themes that are steeped in romanticism and transcendentalism to the religiosity in the text in relation to the prophets and some symbols that I think are significant in this narrative. Starting with the life of Herman Melville as a famous writer. Herman Melville was a very famous novelist and short story writer of the American Renaissance period. Well, I don't believe that he was a kind of Renaissance writer because his themes were somehow grim and dark, and generally he was known to be the writer of Moby Dick, his most famous narrative. Unfortunately for him, he did not live to see the great achievement this novel has made throughout the years. To this day, Moby Dick is still considered a classic, an American classic, and is still dealt with at universities, in high schools, especially in literary circles. And of course, to this day, I believe it still poses questions related to themes and context and what were the reasons behind writing this complex story, apart from it being religious or, let's say, fictional in some way. The most important characters in this story are Ishmael, Captain Ahab, and of course with these two characters here we pinpoint a kind of contradiction between the two, and I believe that this is where the theme of romanticism and anti-romanticism or dark romanticism appears. We will see this with the coming slides and with the discussion. The white whale is another important character in this story because he is an antagonist and a protagonist. His transformation and his contribution to the story changes the course of events and decides Captain Ahab and the other characters' fate. Minor characters in this story are also important, especially Queequeg and Pig, in relation to the cultural context of America at that time. Pip, of course, is a black man, and of course Queequeg is a cannibal, a non-native, and I think that the writer was trying to highlight on the aspect of cultural or a kind of mixture, the cultural mixture that was kind of tethering America together, bringing or shaping America together. Historical socio-economic contexts in the story are of a higher importance because the novel is not discussing a story of a whale or a kind of grudge between a captain and a big fish, but it also highlights a whale industry of the 19th century and the flourishing industrial revolution that took place mostly in Europe and then in America during the time. Well, oil at that time became to be important in illuminating homes and industries. And of course, whale industry in this regard became something to relate to kind of rely on. Herman Melville, as a teenage harpoonist at the time, of course, he has spent 5 years at sea learning how to hunt whales. And of course, it is something related to his thematic context here, where the story is obviously inspired from his experience. Of course, there is also a very important theme that he considers, which is American identity and American quest and search for their nationalism, especially recognition and the idea of finding that kind of peace, inner peace inside. America at that time was still experiencing a new way of life. It was still reconstructing itself. And most of the novels and stories from the time onwards are discussing search for identity. The genre that we are dealing with in this novel is known as the romance. In the previous lecture of the Scarlet Letter, we have said that romance is not about love as much as it is about kind of grim context, grim style, and grim thematic aspects to consider. So here, the dark romantic novel kind of challenges the aspect of romanticism and transcendentalism in this regard, because for them, nature is not sweet as it seems to be, is not as positive as it seems to be. It is something that is peculiar, and it is only perceived and, let's say, well perceived through peculiar minds and moods. So it can be, of course, this is a quote from Melville, where he is emphasizing upon the fact that a human mind can be as strange as should be, and there is no need for you to emphasize upon the positivity of life and goodness of human beings. And we will see this better when tackling themes. So the dark romantic novel is, of course, related to dark romanticism, accentuating human destruction, challenges related in this context to the American psyche, especially the hardships and plight they were facing at the time. Characters, mainly Captain Ahab in this story, faces an identity crisis as he wants to retaliate at a bestial creature. So he wants to kind of revenge and challenge a beast. So evil envelopes and enrobes his goodness with evil and gloominess. And this is what the most important aspect to consider in relation to dark romanticism, or say the dark romantic novel. It is not about happiness, finding love, finding peace. It is rather about destructive nature of human beings, the dark nature of human beings, and we see this better in the character of Captain Ahab. Of course, there is a problem with American life at that time, especially Americans being unable to identify themselves amidst the difficulties they were experiencing. Maybe the societal pressures, as you used to say in the lecture, also in relation to the kind of famous so-called American dream, and them being able to achieve certain aspects, certain things in relation to their lives, their livelihood, and their future prospects. Because of this, of course, because of all the pressure and the darkness enveloping or enrobing Captain Ahab, he transfigures from a good person, a common special man with an aspiring potential to change, into a dark, alienated figure consumed by his need to revenge. It was a kind of, maybe, let's say it was a counter mechanism, a defense mechanism, because he believed that he needed to identify himself, to prove himself worthy, to prove himself to be a kind of representative man. Captain Ahab loses his leg to the big fish, and due to this he became alienated, hard to handle, a difficult person to deal with. And of course, this is in relation to the dark romantic themes, or say romance. We see that characters start or begin their lives by being positive, good people, aspiring people, and then due to some social and psychological aspects, they transform into evil figures. Captain Ahab is the exemplification of a distorted character, symbolizing dark innerness and introjecting his wildest and bestial animalistic qualities. The most important themes in this story are, of course, man versus nature, culture versus nature. We have religion and paganism, pride, greed, madness, free will and fate, death, slavery, revenge, friendship, and individualism as an American theme, or in relation to American Romanticism. So, exploring into culture versus nature, as a novel, Moby Dick may seem to sharpen some sub-themes like friendship, adventure, death, but it also is related to the idea of culture versus nature here. Culture versus nature is highly rooted in the character of Captain Ahab being the civilizing figure in the story. So there is a kind of clash between culture and nature. The former challenges the latter, culture challenges nature, and aspire to domesticate it. There is a kind of slave master mentality in this regard, because culture here is all about cultivating the beast, civilizing the barbaric, westernizing the non-native, the non-original. So here, in this context, it refers to the beast being the animal, but it also refers to the non-native people, or let's say native people, especially Indians or even Africans in this regard, the ones who are considered barbaric, primitive, and the idea of cultivation during the time became a very important theme to relate to, civilizing, considering that the way the white man has the ability to westernize, to civilize, and to enslave people. We see this theme better highlighted in the relationship of Captain Ahab versus the whale, and also in Captain Ahab versus Pip, the black slave or the black man who was kind of dragged by money to follow and worship and obey. As I aforementioned, slavery here is important, and it is connected to the theme of culture versus nature. And of course, there is an urge to tame and suppress nature. This is the reason behind Captain Ahab's tyrannical behavior, reflecting at that time, the 1850s onwards, where slavery was still tolerated. Captain Ahab's greed and pridefulness is another theme, of course. Because of his pridefulness, he is led into madness. This can be translated as a backward vision of the American idea of the common man, a representative man, a distinctive, exceptional figure. Of course, here, because he is obsessed with revenge, he became mad. He is now lunatic because he is no longer connected to the real world. He is connected to his inner agony and inner pain. And because of this, he feels distracted from himself and from society. Of course, he reaches the metaphysics, the metaphysical world, where madness is the only explanation of his abnormal behavior. As he goes insane because of his internal battle he was experiencing, he is eaten every day by shame, guilt, and disgrace out of the incident with Moby Dick. Of course, he is not a representative man, a Renaissance man, let's say, in relation to America here, or a transcendental man, because he lost his leg and his pride to a fish. And for him, this was something kind of belittling him, degrading him, inferiorizing him. The problem with Captain Ahab is that he could not let go of the idea of revenge. He could not kind of surpass the feeling of guilt. He believed that people are mocking him, maybe. They are kind of disrespecting him. The feeling of shame seems to haunt him, eating him inside. And instead of him finding connection with the sea and maybe other achievements in life, he nonetheless transforms into a lunatic character, of course, tragic hero, and this is what leads to his downfall at the end of the story. Fate versus free will is another appreciable theme in this regard, especially in relation to Captain Ahab and his misconceptions about life. The idea of fate versus free will started as a common theme in romantic stories, mostly in relation to the retrospect, to the past that American people used to experience and the way they were highly engendered in puritanical dogma at the time. The idea of free will was inspired from John Calvin, who considered that man was born in sin and there is no need for him to try and promote, enhance themselves to become better. With Transcendentalism and Romanticism emerging in America, most philosophers and thinkers try to change this ideology, encouraging human beings to pursue a better life, to seek success and happiness. And as much as it was inspired from British Renaissance humanism, this transcendental idea of self-cultivation and self-promotion is highly important in relation to American culture. In relation to this story, for example, we see that Captain Ahab is the tragic hero who is steeped in this conception of fate because he believes that it is his fate to challenge the whale and kill him regardless of the result. As a dark romantic hero, he sinks in loneliness and agony, and he follows his fate, following or believing in the prophecies of his friend Fadala, who tells him that he will die fighting the whale. So he believes that he is ingrained in agony and darkness. As he detaches from the transcendentalist dogma of the common man, of the positive man, he cannot or can no longer choose rightfully. For example, the crew members were trying to convince him to return home, but he refuses. Due to his uncalculated decisions, he not only destroys himself, but he also destroys the crew members who die because of his revenge and this kind of feeling of retaliation at nature itself. The theme of individualism in this story is highly manifested. Of course, individualism as an ideology was celebrated by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the father of Transcendentalism in America, and it was inspired to cultivate the individual American to seek a better life through creativity and denying conformity. It was something that contradicted societal norms, societal chains and shackles. There is a positive individualism in this story, for example, in relation to the character of Ishmael, a good man, a representative man who is able to find his way without the obligations and orders of Captain Ahab. In contradiction to this, Captain Ahab is a dark individual. There is a different individualism in relation to this dark tragic hero or dark romantic hero when he is haunted, tortured, showing obsession with revenge. Captain Ahab as an individual seems to be a stereotype of the American romance. Romance here means the tragic or grim side of life, the tragic story, the tragic version of Romanticism, as he embodies the tragic version also of democratic American individualism. Highlighting this, Democratic Party, inspired by Andrew Jackson, called for emphasizing and promoting American common man, representative man. At that time, Andrew Jackson highlighted the fact that every American man, no matter his livelihood, his birth, his education, he is able to make a change and kind of construct a better life for himself and his family. It is an ideology rooted in the American dream. Unfortunately for Captain Ahab, he is different. He is the opposite, because he asserts his dignity as an individual and dares to oppose the inexorable external forces of the universe, the unstoppable forces of nature itself, leading to his downfall. So his individualism and self-dividedness fail when confronting nature's deadly quality. And because he refused to understand it and harmonize with it, nature's dusky, somber side overturns against him and destroys his ego. The story setting is appreciable here, especially in relation to Romanticism, Transcendentalism, and anti-Transcendentalism. We always focus on three types of setting: physical, historical, and most importantly, atmospheric. The physical, of course, is the place where the story takes place or occurs. Here it is New England and also around the globe, because the ship has traveled around the globe for 3 years. A historical setting here in Moby Dick takes place in the 19th century Civil War period, a period of destruction and pain. The atmospheric setting, it is the vibe and the mood that the author creates in the narrative through language. In this story, for example, we see that Ahab is a representation of a dark romantic hero from 19th century America. So who is this Ahab as a dark romantic hero? Ahab destroys himself in his pursuit of the metaphysical self-discovery. Instead of him finding the sublime and finding connection, he wishes to go beyond the limits of God, the power or the forces of nature. So as a dark romantic and tragic hero, Captain Ahab dies at the end because he challenges the cosmic existence of nature and breaks its harmony by challenging its power. So he transforms into a madman because he is, or let's say he has attached himself to the metaphysical side of life. Here, challenging God himself becomes ungodly. It's an ungodly arrogance, emphasizing on the theme of paganism, of course, religiosity and paganism. He is no longer faithful, he doesn't have any connection to God, and we will see with symbols the theme of the whale being a symbol of religion. We see that dark romantic heroes generally start positively, but they transformed due to their inner darkness and evil to become monstrous and devilish. This is a theme that most dark romantic writers highlighted in their stories, denying Emersonian theme of positivity, of transcendentalism, and focusing on the pain and the deconstructive self that human beings tend to grow inside. Symbols are important in this story. For example, the ship symbolizes Noah's Ark as a vessel of rescue. It also symbolizes the ethnic multiculturalism of the new American life in relation to its politics and the melting pot ideology regarding the many cultures that existed in the story or in the ship. It can also symbolize land, referring to the idea of protection and home. In this context, we have in the story the Rachel, the other ship that came to save Ishmael by the end of the story. Number 3 here is very important in Christianity or also in other religious cultures like Islam. Here in the Christian tradition, it signifies unity and Trinity. It symbolizes religiosity. Here, the days and nights of Prophet Jonah, peace be upon him, that he spent in the whale's belly. It symbolizes wholeness, harmony, stability, completeness, and oneness. It is a symbol of fate, referring to the past, present, and future of America or Captain Ahab himself, and also the triad of heaven, earth, and the abyss, and the unity of body, mind, and spirit that Romanticism was always highlighting, the idea of earth and heaven in relation to man, or let's say body and mind in relation to man and nature, and finding harmony and connectedness. There is subliminal reach or abysmal, hellish downfall. The coffin here is religious as it symbolizes Moses' coffin. It can be a symbol of death or life. It symbolizes the abyss and darkness, also hope, survival, and rescue. In this regard, in relation to Ishmael himself being rescued by the coffin by the end of the story, and also religiously speaking in relation to Prophet Moses, who is rescued by a symbol of death. It can be seen as a romantic symbol due to its woodiness, signifying nature and its forestine quality. Where it prevails to appraise Ishmael and elevate him, as I said. And of course, it is a symbol of life, strengthening harmony and enabling Ishmael to harmonize with the sea and abide to nature and its laws. So with the coffin and the woodiness of this coffin, he is granted security and aspiration. So there is a connection here to Romanticism and the idea of woods being a haven, kind of securing spot for them to find happiness and aspiration in it. The whale here, or the white whale to be more specific, symbolizes God in his power and mightiness. The white color here is a significance of purity and goodness. It also symbolizes Christianity versus paganism, blasphemy and materialism versus spirituality and belief. And here, to refer to this and to better explain this, in the past, Christianity was kind of banned by the pagan Roman culture at the time. So most of the Christian people used to identify themselves as Christian with the symbol of the fish. Here, I have done some research here, and I found that the meaning of ichthys, the meaning of ichthys, which is of course an acronym from Greek, it's a Greek word for fish. Ichthys here means Jesus Christ or God's Son or Savior. In this regard, the fish, the big fish, is a symbol of God's Savior or God Himself. The ocean is an element of nature. It symbolizes peace, stability, and harmony. On another flip, twist, it can signify death, destruction, loneliness, and exile. It can stand for the sublime or the abyss because it is a kind of element from nature, and it only functions and operates in relation to the way people harmonize or disconnect from it. It signifies the cosmos, emphasizing the micro-macro relationship of man versus nature. In the story, it was peaceful, harmonious, but by the end, it transforms into a symbol of destruction and death and loneliness, because all the crew members, including Captain Ahab, die except for Ishmael.
So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea. And the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and took vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea. And the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and took vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah.
So we are trying to connect this of Prophet Jonah to the romantic transcendentalist ideology. And here, as you can see, this story was inspired from the Hebrew tradition and also the Bible. But in this context, we see the genius of Herman Melville and his capacity to connect the dots between religiosity and art. In this regard, the story of Prophet Jonah, peace be upon him, is not the only important story in this narrative, but also we have three other prophetic incidents that took place in relation to trials and difficulties, and also in relation to the aspect of Romanticism as far as Melville is concerned. Surprisingly, for this narrative, the religious aspect is highly celebrated and accentuated, and I was all the time trying to understand the connection between the prophets or the symbols related to the prophets that Melville has emphasized in his story in relation to the romantic aspects related to American transcendentalism. So we have in the story four elements signifying four important prophets who are mainly or namely Prophet Noah with his ark, Prophet Jonah with the whale, Prophet Moses through the coffin that Ishmael used to survive, and also the symbol of the second ship known as the Rachel, and the second captain who was looking for his lost son, symbolizing Prophet Joseph. And with these three, or say four prophets, there is something that they share, kind of connectedness to the sublime, to God, in spite of all the difficulties that they have endured during their lifetime. And the connectedness that I have found is related mainly to the romantic tradition as well, through the aspect of the woodiness of the vessels, and also to the water as a very important element in relation to transcendentalism, or the romantic tradition to be more specific. So the religious reference to these four prophets and their trials and the survival is highlighted through, of course, the kind of forest-sign nature of the elements carrying them. These prophets have all been trialed by the water and rescued by the same calamitous aspect. Here, the writer focuses on the water as an element of destruction and or survival. Melville highlighted romantic symbols in the story via the elements of nature, or let's say via elements from the Bible. We see here Prophet Noah and the vessel and then the water. The same water that saved him was the same flood that destroyed the previous nation, his nation. Similarly, the same animal who is a natural beast and the water that swallowed Prophet Jonah was the same element helping him to survive. And also the coffin symbolizing death is the same vessel carrying Prophet Moses to safety and protecting him from sinking. And lastly, we have Prophet Joseph and the fact that he was thrown into the well, and when he almost sank in the well full of water, and the well being an element or a vessel made of stone and ingrained into the earth. So here we need to understand that Herman Melville wrote this masterpiece not only to focus on the story of Jonah, but also to relate us somehow to religion and remind us of God. This is one thing. But there is another important thing which is related to his artistry and the fact that he has written something celebrating a movement, celebrating Romanticism and Transcendentalism on the one hand, and also emphasizing the dark romantic aspects which can be destructive when challenging nature or when challenging God. So instead of him just throwing light on elements of romanticism through fictionality, he was clever enough to symbolize this or interpret this through religion. Here, throwing light on the religious tradition is a reminder of God's assistance and benediction of these prophets, and most importantly, to draw a thin line between fiction and factuality in his allegorizing the romantic features in the prophetic miracles. Melville used the stories of the mentioned prophets, peace be upon them, to reflect on their obedience and submission to divine orders, and how that yielding granted them power and blessings. Intelligently, he employed their stories to highlight how may any figure transcend when accepting God. Here, of course, we see this as a symbol of submission, because he is showing us through understanding the story, understanding the perspective of Captain Ahab and Ishmael as main characters here in relation to the prophetic miracles. We see that Prophet Noah, Prophet Joseph, Prophet Moses, as well as Prophet Jonah submitted to God in a way or in another, and the ones who did not submit to God were punished. In Prophet Noah's story, of course, the flood saved the ones who admitted themselves to the divine by accepting God's commandments at that time when Prophet Noah was building the ark, and when the ship was about to kind of float on that flood. And for the ones who did not believe in God's ability to destroy them, of course, sank and were destroyed by the flood. On an equal footing for Prophet Moses, in relation to the coffin here, I think it is better related to his mother and the fact that she has submitted herself to God and nature's ability to restore back her son for her through the element of destruction or death, the coffin. So the woodiness saved Prophet Moses, Here, Melville is not only focusing on the religious tradition and the prophetic aspects only, but he is aligning this, tethering this, and interweaving this with romantic elements from nature, and urging us to understand that it is all about God's subliminal capacity and galactic ability and power, as well as the way he has given us nature's elements to help us and to attach us to him through our understanding of the cosmos as a whole. In the story of Prophet Jonah, we see that the water that swallowed him with the whale are the ones that threw him later, and this is how he survived, as he submitted himself and he accepted that he has committed a mistake. As far as Joseph is concerned, the well protected him, and it is through the water that was supposed to kill him through drowning, it is the water that helped him climb when attaching himself to the rope, or to the when of course the ones who came to look for water, of course attaching himself to the rope helped him survive. And the kind of, it's not a contradiction as much as it is a kind of harmoniousness in context, thematic harmoniousness that Melville's geniusness managed to adhere to here. I believe that this is important to consider, because it is no way for him to focus only on religion without attaching us to the romantic perspective in the text. So nature in this fashion is embodied in water, in wood, through the ship and coffin and the stone of the well, for example, and in the whale as animal for the prophets, of course. All these natural elements symbolize wealth, power, prosperity, strength, and godliness. As vessels carrying these prophets, they stood at first to be the reason of calamity, but then the means by which their lives have been saved. These prophets, similar to Ishmael in the story, who has been carried by the coffin to a safety ground, synchronized with nature and integrated in its essence to find balance and harmony by obeying God's commandments. The religious narrative is integrated to create an allegory of hope and obedience to nature. The conformity and accordance with the sea does mainly mirror the writer's celebration of Romanticism. Here, for Ishmael, for example, he could find the sublime and transcend and float, because he submitted himself to nature, to the ocean, and this is how he found harmony. And of course, the coffin floated for him, helped him find rescue and security and safety. But for Ahab, for example, it is his challenging of nature that destroyed him, and instead of him finding the sublime, transcending, he descended to the abyss, and he was taken to the lowest of the low, with the whale destroying him and killing him. In this regard, he lost not only his dignity, pridefulness, and sense of awareness, but he also lost the harmoniousness with God. And here we can say that there is, of course, a positive reading to this narrative through the subliminal attachment to God through the story of the prophets, and also through fiction via Ishmael's character, who survived from the shipwreck because he yielded and capitulated to the power of the will. And against Ahab, Ishmael much identified and found unity with the cosmos, which is the sea. In a similar behavior, he created oneness of the transcendental figure, as he could go beyond the feelings of revenge and pridefulness. He is a romantic hero because his soul becomes identical to the world and the cosmos. He is saved by the Rachel at the end as a symbol of security and safety. As Ishmael capitulated with nature and attached to the sublime, we find that Captain Ahab's wooden leg, in spite of its woodiness, it couldn't attach him to the sublime because it was kind of imposed on him. It is made of wood, but instead of it helping him to find his common sense, it destroyed him. It is the motive behind his rage, guilt, and sense of distress. Its woodiness affects his mood and disturbs his state of mind. This wooden leg, of course, is a prosthesis, an addition to his body. It functions as a disturbing element. It bothers him, and it challenges him to submit to nature and yield to it. He is a cultivating master, of course. He doesn't want to be civilized, domesticated, or westernized in the sense of master-slave relationship. So there is here something that we need to consider, where we need to understand that Captain Ahab cannot accept the wooden prosthesis attached to him, as it tends to domesticate his animosity. He doesn't want this. He is a kind of rebellious figure against the universe and against God. As an imposed artificiality to his nature, the wooden leg is inharmonious, as it fails to align him with the world and attach him to realize God's greatness in connection to his microcosmic entity. Instead of it finding connection, or kind of interweaving the connection between God and himself, forging the famous romantic triangle of God, man, and nature being made from wood, it nonetheless detaches him from himself and from God. This is all for now. I hope you find this useful. If you have any question or comment on this lecture, don't hesitate to contact me via my email or leave a comment in the comment section below. Thank you for your attention and patience. All the best.